City Club members, friends, community members, welcome. My name is Jacob Fain, and I am your City Club of Central Oregon Board President. In today's forum, Cracking Open the Childcare Crisis, we are tackling one of the most discussed topics in Central Oregon and across the country. At City Club, we strive to have difficult conversations and work towards solutions to issues in our community. I've had the opportunity to sit with our speakers today, and great stuff that they're talking about over there and great work, so looking forward to today's forum. Before we get started, I want to thank our Platinum and Gold sponsors, ASI Wealth Management, the City of Bend, Central Oregon Community College, Oregon State University Cascades, St. Charles Health System, Brooks Resources, and the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. That was really loud. I'd also like to recognize that February is Black History Month. According to the 2020 census, 0.65% of the Central Oregon population, around 1,600 people, are Black. This compares to 2.2% of the state of Oregon and 13.4% of the US. I looked at these numbers and I wondered, how does it feel to be someplace where there aren't a lot of people who look like you? Have you ever felt that way? On Sunday night, for those of us who were watching the Olympics, we actually got to witness Black history. Erin Jackson became the first Black American woman to medal in speed skating, winning gold in the 500-meter speed skating event. I just get chills thinking about the outpouring of emotion when she was on the podium accepting her gold medal. For anybody who watched it, it was amazing. It was so powerful. And in an interview following the event, Miss Jackson said that she hoped to be an inspiration to other Black boys and girls who had dreams of competing in winter sports but didn't have someone who looked like them to look up to. Do we have an opportunity here in Central Oregon? Can we capitalize on this historic moment and use our world-class ski resort, ice skating rink that our tax dollars have paid for, to attract and promote Central Oregon to Black families across the country? And can we also recognize and acknowledge that there could be some discomfort and insecurity in coming to a community where there aren't a lot of people who look like you? I sincerely hope so. Today's forum is the second in our quarterly partnership with the Bulletin and is presented by Pinnacle Architecture. Our moderator today is Zach DeMars, who is now a familiar face with City Club. Zach is a special projects reporter at the Bulletin and has spent the past couple of months researching and reporting on the issue of childcare. Please join me in welcoming Zach DeMars.
Well, thanks, Jacob, and welcome all to today's forum. The Bulletin is excited to continue our partnership with the City Club to bring you today's conversation about Central Oregon's childcare desert. As many of you know, the need for more childcare is nationwide and touches all corners of our society. But the need is particularly acute in Central Oregon. According to research conducted even before the onset of the pandemic, Deschutes County had enough childcare spots for just one third of the county's 3 to 5 year olds, and just 12% of the county's kids under 2. And when families can find care, it's expensive. The average Deschutes County family pays $875 a month per child for full-time care. We've got a great group of panelists today to dive into this issue. So let's begin by meeting them. And if they want to come on up, we can, and we'll have one joining us virtually here. So Heather Rogan has been in the early childhood education field for over 30 years. She owns and operates Bolden Rogan Early Childhood Academy, which has locations in Redmond and Prineville and is on track to open new centers in Bend and Redmond this year. Karen Prow, who will join us virtually, I promise, is the Director of Childcare Resources at Neighbor Impact. Formerly an early care and education teacher and director herself, Karen now assists childcare providers across Central Oregon with training, technical assistance, and accessing a broad range of funding and other opportunities for their businesses. Erica Spate is the pastor of Ben's story-dwelling spiritual community. A new mother herself, she's also one of the founders of ReVillage, which she'll talk about today, a childcare co-op that launched during the pandemic and uses the empty spaces in churches to provide low-cost daycare. And last but not least, Kelly Sparks is the Associate Vice President for Finance and Strategic Planning at Oregon State University Cascades. Before her time at OSU Cascades, she ran an early learning center in Western Washington. And since then, she's been at the fore of the university campus's efforts to expand access to childcare, particularly with the university's Little Beeves program, which started during the pandemic and is on track to ramp up. So to start our conversation today, I'd like to begin with a story from one of the people most impacted by the region's shortage of childcare. And those are our region's parents and families. Carol Gilbert is a mother of two in Bend, and she sat down with the Bulletin to share her story. Let's take a listen.
The process of finding childcare was an actual nightmare. I had to turn down jobs because I didn't have childcare. We had to stretch our finances because I couldn't work. And then when it was time, when I finally found childcare, it's so expensive that we had to ask a question, is it worth it? Because by the time you do the math, by the time you take out childcare expenses, by the time you account for healthcare coverage, we're all doing this math, all my friends, we're all doing this math. Where are our income levels going to be? What kind of benefits are we going to lose if we pass a certain income threshold? We're all doing this math to try to figure out, is it worth it? By the time I was ready to go back to work when my daughter was around 6 months old, there was no options available. I would email, call all these childcare centers, and I didn't hear back from any of them. Eventually, someone pointed me to a Facebook group. I finally found a childcare provider on that Facebook group, and I got really lucky by finding her, and I was also lucky that it just so happened that I found a job at the same time. That still didn't solve childcare for my 7-year-old. And really, there's only one after-school program available at the schools, and his school was the only school in Bend that had openings, and so I snapped that up through Kids Inc., and I was very thankful to find that. So our childcare situation currently is that my daughter is in an in-home daycare with a provider that I love. She was our only option, and I was really nervous. I had questions like, well, what if she doesn't vaccinate, and what if, what if I don't like her? What if I don't like the space? What if, I had all these questions, because if any of them didn't work, the answer would be, well, you don't go to work. This is the only option. When we met her, we were just stoked. And it was such a good match, and I'm very thankful to have her. That being said, she is one person. She's also a mom, so if she gets sick or if her son gets sick, then, well, we need to keep our daughter home for the day. Yeah, if I could change something about the childcare system, I would ask that childcare is subsidized by the government. There's no way that parents can pay what a child care worker deserves. Child care workers are helping us raise our children.
Well, with that top of mind, let's go ahead and jump into our panel. Hopefully we'll get Karen up here in a moment. There she is. Hi, Karen. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and kick it off with you, Karen. So from your perspective, can you tell us a little bit about the forces that make Central Oregon's childcare environment so challenging to navigate?
Yeah, there multiple factors go into our lack of childcare right now, which you already stated was just magnified by the pandemic. We've had shifts in our society over the years. We don't have children going home and being home on their own anymore, like many of us did when we were young. We don't live near family like we used to, and so we don't have that built-in childcare system. And at the same time, we have an economy where in order to thrive, you really need all the adults in the home working. And so just the need for additional childcare has only grown over the years as our economy has grown. Early care and education has never really been viewed as a profession. It's something that's been worked on over the years, but we haven't made it as far as we need to. And people who are engaged in the field are not paid a living wage. So people really aren't encouraged to pursue a pathway into early care and education. I remember when I took my first child development class, went home and told my dad that I was going to be a preschool teacher. He spent the next 3 years of my life of high school encouraging me to sit down and do budgeting with him so I would see the error of my ways and potentially pick a different direction to go. It's not something we've encouraged people into. And the business model is truly broken. We talk about having the fees for childcare match the actual costs in the childcare program, and then collecting full fees. And then we talk about full enrollment. And programs are really uncomfortable charging a full fee to families because they understand and they're compassionate towards the families of not wanting to put that burden on families. But then teachers are not earning a living wage, not a wage that they can really survive and thrive on. And so, with early care and education being so labor intensive, with those costs going up, providers they can't stay in business. And our ERDC rates, which are employment-related daycare rates, have really set the stage for how much providers charge over the years. And those rates were never meant to cover the full cost of care. They were always meant to be a subsidy. But the 30 years that I've been engaged in childcare in Central Oregon, providers have always used those as a kind of a gauge to set their rates. And so we've really dampened the rates that should be charged, and it's made it so that we couldn't grow a robust industry that's really driven by family need and a desire to provide high quality services. So, so much going on in this, and really I think people who are entering the field they're getting burnout because they're no longer willing to be the ones who subsidize the field anymore.
And so, Heather, I'm kind of curious, how do these factors kind of play into your business? I mean, what are the biggest challenges that you face in trying to operate in the first place and then trying to expand, if that, if that's even something you want to consider?
Well, not only did I consider it, I did it. Most people would say that wasn't the best business plan, but here we are, going from 1 center to 5 in about 15 months. So call me crazy. It's probably why I've been in the business for 30 years. So a key factors are definitely professionalizing the business industry of early childhood. Obviously, I started out in early childhood. I always knew that it was a desire for me, that I love children, but that's not enough. Loving children in this business is not enough. That's not going to keep you in a sustainable wage in a business that you take it home. All those little faces, all those families, everything that you hear throughout the day, because you're caregivers. Deep down, you're in this business because you love people and children. So, for one, it's professionalizing. The people who care for your children are not your babysitter. They've gone to school. They need to be treated as a profession just like everyone else who goes to work. It is their work life. They're not the ones who, you're a half an hour late because, decided something else was important also. But the discounted factor that people often treat early childhood professionals in, I've seen many, many people leave the profession and do something different. A lot of my own staff I have found through conversations, and dental assistants, dental hygienists, people who've worked at the bank, their degrees are early childhood. They've left the industry because of the low wages and the lack of people considering them professionals, and that it's a career that you actually can be in, stay in, and grow in. And so that's a huge piece of what's happening for our early childhood professionals and why people are not going to school for it. And, the wages are a huge factor. And, there's that disbalance that Karen talked about, what it costs to actually have 2 or 3 teachers in a classroom to care for those children at a livable wage. It's not covered by any of our tuitions. No one who is doing early childhood has an infant or toddler classroom that is making any sort of money that will cover that. So you're doing that in hopes that you're building a community instead, that those children and those families have someone that's with their children until they go to kindergarten, versus that it's a moneymaker. You're not in the business for money. And the teachers and the staff need to feel like they're just as important as the person who, puts on the suit and is a banker. Or, the teachers that go into K-12. I've heard a lot about how K-12 teachers are looked at as a profession, and how everyone loves their children's school teachers, but we're also teachers. We're the teachers of the first 5 years. And we know the importance of brain development, social emotional development, but yet that's not spoken about. Often it's like, oh, my kid went to daycare. That's my daycare lady. You see him at Safeway, and it's like, hey, babysitter, versus the profession that you put impact on in other industries.
Yeah, and so how, you touched on kind of the business model challenges, and then also on the stigma challenges of developing that workforce. How have you been able to expand from 1 to 5 centers in such a short time frame? What has that taken for you to be able to do that?
I've had to put myself out there. Honestly, is it a great business model? As you guys probably all sitting out there thinking, what is she doing? Like, obviously, I have mortgages or leases that are forever long. You go to bed and you think about that next mortgage payment that's ginormous, more than I used to make in a year is what I'm paying out in mortgages right now. But what it's taken is knowing what we need. Like, I'm not new to this. I know what we need. We need a community. We need someplace where a parent can go and you can see that something has changed in that family, and you're reaching out to them. Hey, I've noticed this. Do you need someone to hear you? Is there a resource? Whatever it is, or that their child has distinctly different behaviors than they've had before. What can we do for them to wrap around our community? That's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because there's that need, and I'm willing to take the risk. It's a full risk that I'm taking, but it's because I'm looking at it as a bigger picture. It's not just childcare. It's for our community. It's for the businesses that are saying no one can come to work, they can't find childcare. Well, at the end of this, we should have another 350 slots. out there, 350 kids that have someplace to go. So for businesses to understand the risks that we're putting out there, to be able to have wages that are livable for staff, mean that rates are higher, for sure. It's a big piece of that. Also, you're going to have, sorry, I feel like I'm in a Tetris game right now. That also shows my age, doesn't it? But you're also going to have to staff in a way that you've never had to staff in early childhood before. It's no longer those 2 or 3 people in a classroom. You have some days way too much staff, which is great, because then you get teacher prep time and you can make sure their professional development's being done. But sometimes you're struggling, but you have to way overstaff in this industry, and especially now with the pandemic the last 2 years. It's not the same as it was a couple years ago, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And so I want to jump back to Karen here. Lots of times in the conversation about solutions to the childcare crisis, we come to this idea of subsidy. And I think oftentimes people think about government subsidy as, a solution. But Karen, I think you have a really interesting perspective on this. Is this industry already being subsidized by someone or some agency? Sorry, Karen, it sounds like our audio is off.
Her, she's muted.
Oh, you might be muted. You're still muted. We are still muted. All right, well, maybe we can jump back to this idea of subsidy in a little bit. Let's go ahead and jump into some of our conversation about solutions. We've got 2 folks here who are kind of engaged in solutions, responses to the childcare crisis. And so let's start with Kelly Sparks. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about what Little Beeves is and what Little Kits is going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I will hold mine far away from me. So during the pandemic, like many employers and educators, we found that in order to get our students back to Zoom school and our faculty behind the screen teaching, they needed childcare, both K through 5 support for their kiddos who were out of the classroom and at home, as well as for young kids. And I real call out to Lori Waters, who's here in the room. She jumped into this endeavor with me and helped us launch within 3 months a pilot Little Beeves program on campus. We took some classrooms offline. We converted them into spaces for both K through 5 as well as a preschool classroom, brought in student workers and faculty support, and launched a temporary program for childcare. And we filled up immediately and found that the need was certainly there, and it was something that we felt like we wanted to make the commitment to our faculty, staff, students, and extend it to the community over time to continue. And so we went after it. Like Heather said, it's not a business model that makes sense, and it certainly doesn't make sense to convert a classroom and a university space to do this. There isn't hand washing stations. It's not plumbed in the right way. It doesn't meet all of the same requirements for fire code as an early childhood center, so it's fairly cost intensive. And then when you think about the classroom size and the number of children and the number of teachers, the cost outweighs the potential revenue source to support it. So we decided we need to build a center. It was in our long-range plan for the campus, but we decided it was needed sooner rather than later for our very non-traditional higher education base. We have non-traditional students. Our average age is 25, many returning students, many continuing students from COCC who are continuing on to get their bachelor's degree. So really serving a student population that was asking us for childcare, and then faculty faculty and staff to support them to continue to stay working with childcare. So we created a model to say, how can we do this for ourselves and for other potential public employers across the region by designing a modular center that could be replicated, so not having to redo the design costs every time on other locations across the region or the state. Have a modular, use a state contract to pre-negotiate the cost for a modular center construction, so it's pre-negotiated for other early childhood educators who may not have all the resources that we do at OSU Cascades as a state entity with a construction team. And then to talk about how we build out growing staffing in collaboration with COCC, who has an amazing early childhood program, and we have a human development family sciences program. So how then can we recreate the model for those who are seeking degrees to become professional teachers in early childhood education. So it was a number of different, both the workforce side and the physical or built environment to expand care were the two primary things we were looking at.
And what is your sense of what, some of the advantages that you had as kind of a state or a state organization or a nonprofit? Not, you're not getting into this for the business angle, but what are the advantages that you had as a state organization? And I guess there were probably some challenges there too, but how is that kind of different navigating that than a private entity might?
Yeah, so there's certainly pros and cons. One, we have land. So as an institution of higher education, we have land, and we consider the ancillary services, or what we can call auxiliary services, that support our students being successful in graduating as an important part of our mission as well. Also, as a university, as a four-year public university, we community engagement or community integration is also a part of our core mission. And then research. We do work in this space. Our faculty are working in trauma, resiliency, in supporting early childhood education through our Human Development Family Sciences program. So it really met our mission, all three of our of our mission. So the pro is the land. The pro is that we also have an accounting team. We have a construction and project management team. We have some expertise in building and building buildings. So we were able to leverage those at no additional cost to help us build the program. But we had to hire all the teachers. We had to hire a director of our program. Dana Swanson is here today. We're so lucky to have attracted really incredible talent to OSU Cascades to do this work. And so that's been important. Some of the downsides are that we have standards at OSU around how we pay that are bargained across the state. We have some rigidity around how we do things as a public entity. And when you're trying to recreate or change the norm in anything, breaking down some of those internal barriers, when you're pushing up, again, as Heather said, a business model that isn't a business model, it shouldn't be a business model. When you're talking about caring and supporting young children, that can sometimes feel like a challenge, an additional challenge to making it happen.
Right, yeah. So let's jump over to Erica now. Why don't you start with just what is ReVillage, where did it come from, and what is the mission behind what you're doing?
Yeah, so a little under 2 years ago, a group of parents from two faith communities in Bend, the Story Dwelling community and First Presbyterian, got together to say there's got to be a way that we can do this together. We're not meant to do this alone. And I think from a faith perspective, this is ultimately a moral issue. It's an economic justice gap, and it's also a community care gap. Like Karen was saying, we're seeing the webs of resiliency that maybe our communities had in the past have kind of broken down. So the people really do feel in this on their own. So we got together. I said, there's got to be a way. We got in it for ourselves, really. I was 6 months pregnant at the time. And ultimately, over the course of the first stages of the pandemic, Becca Ellis, another co-founder who's here, and a couple of us went through the process of saying, if we're going to do this, we need to do this for the families who need care the most. So we started plans to plant a childcare co-op, a certified childcare co-op in the nursery of First Presbyterian, and that opened last May. So we're new, we're new to this. And we have plans that are in process. We have renovations underway at a downtown location as well. So the vision is to plant and offer accessible, high-quality care for children, but also for parents. So our parents come into the classroom every day as classroom aides, which helps to keep our costs lower, but also, more importantly, is working to build back up that web of resiliency. When you go through something hard in your life, Heather knows this, Kelly knows this, it's your child care center or your school that is there, that is kind of mitigating some of those hardships emotionally, socially. So we're building community, we're accompanying parents, and that's the origin story. Yeah. And so, what has the process been like from being not an expert in childcare to starting your own childcare center? Was that particularly easy? So naive, so bold. But we did this because we just feel really convicted about it. And as parents, we are, I've learned this from Becca, from others, we are our children's first teachers, so maybe we knew more than we thought we knew. The challenges of, ideally, part of our model is to use church spaces that are underutilized over the course of the week. Other spaces too, for free or very low cost. So far for free, and that keeps our costs low as well. But one of the biggest barriers in Central Oregon and in Bend is that, if you want to start a new center, where do you do it? Can you afford to buy land? No. Can you afford to build a building? No. Can you buy something that is built? Maybe. But then is it sprinkled? Does it have appropriate plumbing? And so we've come up against all of these things. So it really is this requiring a lot of creative energy to do that. And as being some of the new kids on the block in childcare, we've uncovered that everybody who is here is putting a ton of creative energy into out of this conviction, we must figure this out for the sake of our families, for the sake of our children, and we must cobble this together and get really creative about it. And that's a unique part about this field, a gift of the field, but it also shouldn't be that hard. You shouldn't have to maybe be that creative. And what do you think an alternative would look like? What would be an easier path? And maybe this is a question for Erica, but it could be a question for anybody here as well. Well, I'll just say that, we're really aware that we want to add to the buffet of options that families have. Our center wouldn't work for every family. I think we would each say that. So families need a variety of options that work best for them. Start with the family's needs, build our programs from there. But really, I have an almost 2-year-old. I have the privilege of having a flexible work schedule, a spouse who has the same. We both have to work full time, but also my parents moved to town after we had our child. So we have the best case scenario in some ways, but he needs peers. He needs access to school still, even though we can cobble it together. So I think every family needs to have access to make the choice that is best for their family. The money, yeah. What else would you all say? Heather or Kelly?
Well, I'll go back to your early question on subsidization.
Yeah.
So we've been subsidizing this childcare off of childcare providers, so off of teacher salaries, off of lack of benefits, and off of childcare operators, sometimes taking it out of their own salary at the end of the month. That's not long-term sustainable, and that's so we need to find a different way to allow to subsidize families. It is for so I'll use an OSU Cascade student or a COCC student. You're paying tuition, you're paying childcare, and you're paying rent or a mortgage. That's $2,000, $2,000, $2,000 if you have 2 kids. That's not, $6,000 is a month. Where's food, where's energy, where's, all of your other costs, as well as being able to play a little bit in life, to have, we want to live our lives and have fun too. That's not long-term sustainable. So we have to drive down the cost of childcare, whether, I have some personal opinions. I won't say they're OSU Cascades opinions, but I do believe we have to subsidize it differently. What are the opportunities from federal, state funding? What are the opportunities from employer contributions? What are other ways that we can drive down the cost of childcare and still pay living, benefited wages for career early childhood educators to get into this field? And just taking the cost of the infrastructure or the rent out of it isn't enough to make it sustainable. That's not enough. That is one part of the burden, and that's an incredibly important. But we've got to, the next is then how do you pay for the benefits of those employees? I think some form of either raising the ERDC levels, having a graduated or an income-based payment scale for families paying for childcare. I think the form of employer contributions could be an important part of filling that gap. If we think about the cost of turnover of employees or women leaving the workforce, whether during a pandemic or when they have a child and they're doing that math, does making $40,000 a year, is it meaningful? And when they step out, it's harder to get back in. It's harder to make those living wages. Their salary gap between men and women grow over time. I think you've all read all about this, just like I have, but we've got to subsidize it in a different way.
And Heather, any thoughts on what would make the path for, you already have expanded and you're working on expanding more, but do you have any sense of what would make that path even easier?
I think some of what we spoke about just at lunch was it's super difficult to find the space that'll work, and having licensing and the fire marshal and sanitation, everybody being able to look at it through the lens of early childhood and what is needed for the children. Does it make sense to have, I have 4 ADA bathrooms in Redmond. That makes 0 sense. These are little tiny tykes, right? But it was required by the city to do so when we did our remodel. So, but does that make sense for an early childhood center? No, it doesn't make sense at all. Would anybody use this building for anything else now? Not that I've done what I've done to it. So I want to be an early childhood center. So I think having more people as a team approach, and I know that Karen and I have talked about this, lots of people, we've talked about it at lunch, looking at it as if this is going to be, it's not going to go away, right? Childcare is something that's always going to be here, early childhood. Hopefully we're looking at it through a different lens. So let's get everybody to the table. Every single city I'm in now has different regulations, different people that are signing off on different pieces of my licensing. So how do we make this complex, because it is very complex, situation easier, and so it's more attainable? Most people would give up. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I had a deadline date last year of I think it was 3/12, and we were still crazily in a discussion about a second gate on my play yard, which would make no sense because it goes out to a main street. I already have a double play yard gate, but I couldn't get signed off to open. In my grant, I needed to be signed off, and I need to have that by 5 o'clock. So here I'm thinking I'm going to lose the only opportunity we have to serve all these families and children in Central Oregon and Redmond, and it all came down to a gate that I really didn't need in the long run because another fire marshal came by and said, that's crazy, you don't need that. So that's the kind of thing, it's like getting everybody on the same page. Don't have one person say one thing, the next person who signs off says another thing. If we all had a vision of what makes sense for safety, what makes sense for the age of the children that you're working with, we could operate at a much quicker ability instead of it taking 18 months to open up a center, 2 years to open up a center. Who knows, it can take forever. Having a fast path where you have a lot of people who all understand what the end result is, who's using this space. that would be ginormous, I think, just in general, for people wanting to go into this industry, because it's not for the faint of heart, let me tell you. I think I was laying on the ground. I think I cried afterwards when I finally got that final sign-off, because it was a huge amount of money that I was going to have to walk away from if I didn't have that very last signature. And that in itself is enough to think, why was I continuing to do this? But I made it through the one hurdle. Why not keep going? Add another one. So, but having that centralized, unit for opening up centers would be a fantastic way to help in every aspect of the buffet, like you were talking about, from your type, like a co-op situation to Head Start to private to nonprofit, all the different gamuts. We're all facing the same issue with all the different entities that all look at their own rules that don't make sense with these rules. So that's huge.
And Karen, are you back with us? No, I'm getting a head shake. Sorry, Karen. So then I think we're going to jump into our Q&A now. If we have questions, okay, and if you have questions, how should folks get their questions to me, Kim?
On the table, there are the numbers.
Great. On your tables, there's some information about how to get your questions to me. So let's go ahead and start here at the top. So what would you want someone starting a daycare to know? This might be a good question for Heather or for Erica, maybe.
I'm going to say from my aspect, what people probably don't know is my job is never an 8-hour day, ever. I'm literally in a center for 10 hours. After that, I'm talking with managers. I'm talking with parents. I have an app that I'm checking to see if there's anything for the next day. I was telling Zach recently that we go to Costco. Guess what? It takes 3 cars. It's an all-day thing. It took 4 of us with 4 carts. This is every weekend for food, because right now we don't have that supply chain for figuring out how to, Cisco could maybe work, but probably can't get to 2 of my centers just because of location-wise. Wouldn't make sense. So I'm spending all day on the weekend. We're getting food, making sure that everything's there set up for the next week. And on Saturday, I'm doing business reports and washing. I wash a lot of laundry. A couple of my sites, there was no way because of the concrete in the building to be able to put a washer and dryer in that site. So that's in the back of my car. If you ever want to know what, you have nothing to do on the weekends, let's wash the laundry. So it is absolutely 10 hours a day, 5 days a week in the center. And then you're talking after hours. You have to love and want to do what you're doing. Because sometimes you're like, okay, how many more loads of laundry? Oh gosh, last weekend I had to go to 3 places for the food because everyone was out of things. So when we talk about how the pandemic has affected everybody individually, think about if you're feeding 50 to 60 kids at each center, and guess what? Safeway didn't have this, Walmart didn't have that, I think I went to Fred Meyer's too, and we ended up at Grocery Outlet last weekend. So it's about that system. Obviously, as we grow, we're gonna want to figure out what else we can do, but I have a food manager and myself doing shopping on the weekend and delivering it. That's really fun.
Great, okay. And so Baby Promise and Preschool Promise. Do any of the 3 of you want to touch on kind of broadly what those programs are and how they operate? Kelly, maybe?
So I think all 3 of us are Baby Promise providers. So Baby Promise is a program that is, it's a state-funded program to support our lowest income families, and it provides the full cost of care to the provider for those kiddos in your program. So is the question around, Karen's the best person to answer this. There's a certain number of slots, and I'm going to go from my knowledge, and if you want to add on here, there's a certain number of slots for each region for Baby Promise or preschool providers. The application for Preschool Promise should be opening up here really soon for additional providers. Baby Promise would be reaching out to Karen Prow at Neighbor Impact to see if there's additional slots that they're still trying to fill for Baby Promise providers right now. The application information for Preschool Promises is on the Early Learning Division's website, and Preschool Promise would be through Neighbor Impact, our local childcare resources here in Central Oregon. Is there anything that you should want to add?
The only difference I would say when you're looking at Preschool Promise is it is 900 hours a year. So unless there's additional funding for summers, hopefully those families will have the employment-related daycare to help with the cost for summer. If you're a Monday through Thursday program at 6 hours a day, you have wraparound that those families are needing. And then Fridays, we don't have Fridays for Preschool Promise, so families have a reduced rate that I offer for those days. So it does a lot for our families locally, but it also doesn't fill the whole 40-hour-a-week parent situation. And then, of course, there isn't any summer care out there. I have quite a few parents that have been calling around for their school-age children, and no one wants to even be called at this moment because we don't know what's going to happen for summer. So it's something to consider that should be, I feel, more funded a little bit more like Baby Promise, where it is for the working families versus the 900 hours, but that's what we have, and that's what we'll work with because it's something that is new to our region and is out there to help supplement what we have for our families to choose from.
And so we had a question up here about some regulation and requirements. I'm curious from the three of you, how do you in your head do the balancing between, obviously you want enough regulation to keep your places safe and high quality, but at what point do those start to get cumbersome and kind of in the way of being able to expand and do what you want to do? So, are there particular regulations that you see that could be relaxed or reduced, even on, kind of a temporary basis while we're in a particularly high level of need?
I don't even know where to start. They're cumbersome from day one. And you're right, like they should be. We should have high quality, super safe environments for our children and for our staff. But there is no area of care that is not touched by one of those very high regulatory features. So some of the challenges around space, which I articulated, we would love to open an infant center, but it is very, the regulations around hand washing, formula, the way your plumbing operates, what kind of potty you have, and how many feet the potty is away, all of these things. Perhaps the biggest barrier, once you start to list them, you could go on for days. Perhaps the biggest one is that I and Becca and some of our, you talk about folks who are kind of subsidizing, right, just like out of our love, doing this, have had to become experts in all of this. And not a great use of my time because the learning curve is so high. So it seems like breaking down a barrier could look like a superstar team of people for whom they know this stuff off the top of their head, and they accompany new centers or existing centers in navigating all of that, because the regulations should be high. Perhaps there are ways that we can have them be compromised in some ways, but really it's having to learn them and set up the million appointments and hold all of that expertise. We wouldn't ask any of our K through 12 teachers to be an expert in ingress egress of their classroom, and yet our teachers have to be experts in that, and directors have to be experts.
Yeah, I would just add, so we had the benefit of the regional solutions team, Annette Lieb, help us bring together all the regulatory agencies and walk a building together. Obviously, that can't happen for every future child care center, but it was the City of Bend, it was Deschutes County Public Health, it was the State Fire Marshal, it was I'm missing a couple, the Early Learning Division. And so to get all of those people, one, was really challenging from a scheduling perspective. Then the second is, as we walked the spaces, we realized in those conversations that there is a sequential order in which you go through that application process that you have to learn, but then you also have to learn, you start here, you go back here. And they're not always in complete concurrence with each other in terms of that process. And sometimes it's who you talk to and getting a little bit of a different decision. They're all well intended, and they want to come to the table to help us make these things happen. But it does take a huge amount of coordination and effort and expertise on the part of the childcare providers. And so I don't think there's an easy answer to say there's one regulation that goes away, because the intent of a sprinkled building is for the safety of children, and sometimes that can make sense. But if you're trying to remodel an older building and it's not sprinkled, the cost of adding that sprinkle to it can be a barrier to adding new childcare center. And where's the alternative of where that kiddo might end up? In a less safe environment. So are we meeting the intent, or are we meeting the regulatory requirement? And I think that's the part we need to break down, is the intent, and how can we get to a place where we're interpreting things in a way that allows for the intent for safety to happen, but also expediting the process to approval and building.
And we had a question up here about how can Oregon, how can Oregon leverage funding to increase equity and expand childcare opportunities? So kind of a broad question here. Any initial thoughts, Heather, maybe?
I'm going to start with, there's a gap. There's a huge gap right now. And I will say, it's across the board. It's with, I'm just going to say, it all starts with employment-related daycare. You know, it really, really does. You can come in at a certain level, which is like $18 an hour. So if you're two people that, you have a mom and a dad, or a mom and a mom working, and they're not going to make employment-related daycare. They're going to be maxed out and not allowed to get in. But once you're in, the intent is then your income level goes up by quite a bit. That $18 goes to $33 at the exit level. So at that point, one person might be making $15 an hour, one's making $17 an hour. They're still able to get employment-related daycare. The issue is we stopped all of that and went back down to the initial level back in October for families. So families that really could use this assistance to get in and to be working no longer qualify. They had a pandemic level, as though I think we're still under a state of emergency for COVID, but they dropped that and they changed the level. So families are not qualifying for employment-related daycare, which is a much-needed subsidy to be able to go to work. And so I feel like there's a ginormous gap there. It was working fairly decently. The income levels were much higher up till October, and then they went back to the 185%. And then I hear that they might be going up to 200% of poverty level. But with that being said, we're still missing the boat of people who could, we talked about, wage versus childcare, and having like a staggered set of what that could look like for families. But we have those families that are making, we were talking, I think, 40 to 80,000 that absolutely cannot pay mortgage, daycare for 2 children, and continue to provide food for their children, and to provide electricity that's being cut off. And so we're missing the boat of that working wage family. And how do we help them? Because we know that our costs, when you have staff that are being benefited at a livable wage, we can't necessarily lower our prices to a level that all equals and balances and still run a business. So looking at that, and then our programs like Baby Promise and Preschool Promise also have an income level that before ERDC wasn't part of that equation, now is in that equation. And so people who are able to get into those programs that have really prospered, I can say over a year of having this program, those families that came in last March are definitely having an ability to have secure childcare, a community that they now belong to. They're doing better in their work. They're looking at advancing in their own jobs, but when they go to re-up, they now have to be at that 185% of the poverty level and meet ERDC levels. So they're going to lose Baby Promise, and they're going to lose childcare. So we helped a group of families, but we're also hurting them because when they go to re-up their application, they no longer have care. So there's a complete inequity of how we're looking at things based upon maybe something that was signed in a bill or in legislature. It's missing. It's missing the boat. And we're forgetting what we really put those things out there for the intention. And I know that as a baby promise provider, I'm really, really worried about what's going to happen to these families. Because if you don't have ERDC and you no longer qualify for baby promise, you no longer have childcare. So there's going to be a major gap that's coming up. So that's a huge concern of mine, and how it could, in my head, because I'm simple, it seems like a pretty simple fix. It was working, then we broke it. So how do we bring it back to working again?
And Kelly or Erica, on this idea of expanding equity and expanding access with streams of funding?
Well, I completely agree with everything Heather said. I think we need to subsidize households with 40 to 80K households, probably 30 to 80K household incomes from 1 or 2 parent families with multiple children. We need to provide equity and allowing, helping support that childcare. And it could be an employer contribution, it can be a state contribution. I don't know exactly what the right answer is, but and maybe a combination of both.
You know, there was conversation about no family paying more than, was it 7 to 10% of their income, which is an imperfect metric, and yet some place to start, right? Because that really shifts the paradigm from, this is childcare, it's just in case you really need it and you have to be desperate, and it's just to keep it created, some broken systems that help a number of families, but also worth noting that if you're going to school, whether it's a 4-year degree or whether it's trade school, you're not eligible for this. So you can't go to school, you can't have childcare. So it seems like shifting the paradigm to across the board, no matter who you are, creating some kind of level playing field for access to care.
And just to do the quick math on that, if you make $200,000 a year, you can afford 10% of your income is $1,000 for each of your 2 kids, right? So
which would be so cheap.
Right, which would be less than the market rate for childcare, right? So that's when we think about a $40,000 income of a parent provider trying to pay that $2,000 a month, that's a little more than 10% of your income.
Well, I think we've got time for one more question here. I know there are a ton more questions, and we could go all day. But I think we've got time for one more question here. So for each of you, what is one action that people or the businesses or organizations that they're a part of could take to help ease the crisis?
I'm going to go back to the financial piece. As a business owner now myself, are there ways that you can get tax advantages for having a subsidy that you can provide for your employees that possibly could just offset a little bit? And also, what a great benefit that would be. Who wouldn't want to stay employed, right? Within a company that's investing in you and your children. And I don't know what that would look like, but as a tax advantage, that has to be something that could be looked at. If I want to not be looking at just ERDC, how do we look at that as a system of employers? What other types of things can we put in the pot that people can pull from?
Yeah, well, I'll co-sign all of that, the financial piece. So then maybe I'll say there are other resources and gifts in Central Oregon and Bend, right? So whether it's space, it's land, it's time, it's individual contributions to nonprofits and other things. I think getting back to that, these are all, we say at ReVillage, there's no such thing as other people's children. We really need to think that way. And I think that perhaps communities decades ago thought that way more. We were in closer contact with one another. We know our neighbors better. But we need to return to that thought, because I think when we start to realize these are all of our children, this is the future of Central Oregon, this is the future of Bend. If we want families to stay here, if we want children to grow up here, then I think we'll start making different decisions with our money, with our time, with our land, with our buildings.
I have 2. First is if you know a prospective early childhood educator, somebody who's graduating from high school, somebody who's returning to the job market, somebody who wants to make a career change, there's a program for them out there. There's a future apprentice program coming. There's scholarships for full ride scholarships to either COCC or OSU Cascades available. And there's paid internship or paid work programs. So while they're getting those, whether it's professional development credits or degree-bearing credits, I'm happy to have you call me and I will put you in contact. Karen's not here. She's got a Childcare Navigator for people who want to enter into the career profession. We can get you set up with a way to do it where you can get paid while you're getting that learning and entering into the market. The second is if you're an employer and you're interested in talking about how to make employer contributions for your teams to retain and attract people into your workforce. There's lots of childcare centers across the region that I know would be interested in setting up employer contributions, and we're starting to talk and organize how we do that across the region to help subsidize those employees and guarantee spots for your organization. We would love to talk to you about that as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much to our panelists today, and thanks to all of you joining us in person and online. We're back to Kim Gammond, Executive Director of City Club.
Thank you so much to Kelly, Heather, Karen, and Erica for sharing your work, and to Zach for moderating us today. I urge you, if you have not, to read the series in the Bulletin that Zach has published over the past couple weeks. It goes into even deeper than we were able to go today. And thank you to all our childcare providers out there. This is a profession that, as we discussed today, deserves our utmost respect. And as a parent, I cannot express how much we truly value you and what you do in our communities. I'd also like to thank our planning team, Ruth Williamson, Emma Vitas, Daisy Lehman, Katie Brooks, Jody Turner-Lawrence, and Zach DeMars. And I'd also like to thank our presenting sponsor for today's forum, Pinnacle Architecture, our supporting sponsor, SunWest Builders, and our partner, The Bulletin. We could not do these forums, especially in a hybrid format, without our sponsors and members. If you are not currently a member or are interested in sponsorships, please visit cityclubco.org or contact me. And then thank you to our elected leaders here today, Melly Kabler, Kat Zwicker, Bruce Abernathy, Xavier Borja, and Oliver Tatum. And then finally, on March 17th, we will be back at the River House. We are going to increase our capacity. This is our annual Regional City Managers Forum that will be moderated by Tammy Bainey, and it is a very popular event. So we hope to see you and many others here next month. As always, thank you for being here today. Please continue to cultivate conversation and help build our community. Thank you.